So in the Ship of Theseus video, I promised you to tell you a story that was supposed to bolster my claim that there are no identity facts out there in the world for us to sort of discover irrespective of our practices. Right? So the picture that I'm reacting against is the idea that, okay, we can have certain practices of calling things the same thing. Right? I mean, for instance, in the case of the Ship of Theseus, what we have is a practice of disassembling things and then putting them back together and saying it's still the same thing, right? The same chair, watch, ship, whatever. We also have a practice of replacing parts of something, but then claiming that it's still the same thing. And again, I mean, like you put a new tire on your car, you say that it's still the same car, even though it has a new tire. My car has a new tire. I mean, in saying that, you are making a sort of identity claim, claiming that the car is still there after the replacement. And so that's a way we talk about identity. And now, when we apply both of these ways of talking about identity to the Ship of Theseus case, we are in this weird situation where we have to say that the ship in the harbor is identical to the original ship, the ship in the museum is identical to the original ship, but they don't seem to be identical to each other. And then if you started out from the idea that identity is some relation in the world, waiting for us to discover it, and fitting the logical categories that we associate with identity, such as transitivity, then we are in philosophical trouble. Right? And we've got to do something to solve it. And my suggestion at the end of the video was that, why would we feel obliged to get into this philosophical trouble and then try to once again extricate ourselves from it? Why do we believe that identity, right, whether one thing is the same thing as something else, is some kind of natural or worldly relation that is out there for us to discover, and which therefore we can know a priori, well, therefore is maybe too strong, but which apparently we can also know a priori to have certain logical features like transitivity. If A is identical to B and B is identical to C, then A must be identical to C, like that kind of logical feature. We can know it to have that, and if our practices of talking about identity don't live up to that kind of like logical feature, then we are at fault. Right? And we have to change our practices in order to talk once again rightly about identity in the world. Okay, what kind of story could I tell you to try to sort of loosen the grip of that picture on you? Well, I'd like to start by taking what I think is probably one of the most important identity relations. Right? I mean, one thing that you can feel about the Ship of Theseus is that not very much is at stake. But surely there's a lot at stake when we think about personal identity. Right? The fact that I am still the same person as the person who so and so many years ago did this and this thing is often very important. Right? I made a promise back then, I need to keep it now. I signed a contract back then, I can be held liable for it now. I did something great back then, I can still be famed and like justly adulated for that now, and so on and so forth. Right? It seems to be very important to us in all kinds of contexts to know identity, like identity facts over time about ourselves and other people. So if any identity relation sort of should be worldly, then it seems to me that like this should be it, right? Surely then personal identity is something that we could be just wrong about, and the world tells us what the right relation is. Okay. Here's the story I want to tell. Suppose that there's a people somewhere, like there's a group of people somewhere, an isolated tribe, so to speak, who have the following social, cultural custom. Every decade, they have a very special ritual. Right? It involves 3 nights of dancing and feasting and calling on the gods and all kinds of stuff that they're doing for 3 days. And at the end of those 3 days, all ties between yourself and anything you did before the ritual are severed. So any promises you made, nobody will hold you to them. Marriages you engaged in, they're no longer there. Debts you had, nobody will try to collect them. In fact, if somebody were to try to collect them, then the entire community would say, what are you doing? You know, the guy who got into the debt no longer exists. And the guy to whom the debt was made also no longer exists. We're new people now. So suppose that the entire society works that way, right? Absolutely. Of course, they do not deny every kind of continuity with the past. I mean, they will agree that if they lost their little finger before the ritual, that if somebody lost their little finger before the ritual, then there's a certain continuity with the person they are now, because they will also not have a little finger anymore. So they don't deny those kinds of continuity, but they deny that this is what personhood consists in, right? They just do not believe, any of them, that it's the same person who lost the little finger back then and who doesn't have it now. Maybe it's the same body or something like that, but it's not the same person. The entire society works this way. And, you know, the ritual is really a time of renewal. It's a moment when people sort of pick up a new life. They get new partners. They adopt new kids. They even often change their beliefs. Right? They are very, like, the political beliefs, their spiritual beliefs, whatever. It is not the case that everybody always totally changes it, but it is a well-known phenomenon that there's radical changes during the ritual in what people believe, for instance. So that's the way that the entire society functions. And so all of them claim that they are not the same person as they were before the ritual. And so they will claim that every body, like I'm talking about the physical thing, is going to be the host, or is going to be identical to maybe, but it's going to be the host, let us say, of many different persons over its lifetime. Right? If it's a body that gets 60 years old, then it will have 6 or 7 different persons inhabiting it, if that's the word that you want to use. Now, the question that we can ask ourselves is, do those people get anything wrong? Right? You might say, well, they're going to get into trouble. I mean, suppose that you murder someone 30 minutes before the ritual. Isn't everybody going to murder a lot of people 30 minutes before the ritual and steal stuff? And I don't know, because you know what? It's their chance to get away with it. Because after the ritual, they won't be the same person anymore and there won't be any criminal liability. And you say that to these people living in this society and they say, oh no, because look, just before the ritual, I mean, who cares about that stuff? You know that you're not going to be existing to enjoy the murder of your rival or enemy for more than 30 minutes anyway. So nobody goes to the trouble of murdering. You know that you won't hold your possessions, right? Because you will cease existing and your possessions will no longer be yours. Nobody is going to try to steal anything shortly before the ritual. And so they just deny that they have that kind of problem. Well, maybe they have other problems. But then again, they will come to us and say, well, you've got a lot of problems too. I mean, you've got these hereditary billionaires and you've got people who are stuck in their lives and very unhappy and so on and so forth. Well, you should try our customs. So we can have a debate about whose customs work better, right? But it's not obvious that their customs don't work or that our customs are the ones that obviously do work. So, given that we can't give a sort of pragmatic argument maybe for or against any of these customs, can we try to mount a case that our way of thinking about personal identity fits reality and theirs doesn't? I have no idea how. I mean, what are the independent facts about personal identity that we could appeal to in order to show these people that they are just dead wrong, right? What are those? I mean, we don't have a personal identity meter. I don't think we do. We've just got a lot of customs and ways that we act and ways that we think that are built around a certain picture of personal identity. But if you have different customs and ways that you act built around a different idea of personal identity, I just don't see how there could be any non-question begging way in which we could argue that we latch on to some worldly facts about identity and they don't. And if that's already true for something like personal identity, what's the chances that there are like worldly facts about which ship is really Theseus's ship? I mean, what are we doing when we engage each other in that kind of debate? Like, at best, what we're doing is we're trying to sort of make a more elegant way of our own ways of talking about identity, I suppose. But like a lot of the importance of the discussion seems to come from the idea that we're latching onto something real, right? Or we're doing serious metaphysics because there must be a real structure of the world where things are or are not identical, and that's what we philosophers are going to find out about. And I'm just not seeing it, right? I'm not seeing how there could ever be a non-question begging way of arguing that a certain way of thinking about identity latches on to reality and another way of talking about identity doesn't latch on to reality. Again, maybe this is just my bad anti-realism or pragmatism or whatever shining through, but I don't get it. And I think the kind of story, like an almost Wittgensteinian story, really, if you think of the later Wittgenstein and all his like descriptions of practices that are different from ours, and how they would make language look different, but no worse, maybe. This idea that language could look very different, but no worse, that's an idea that seems very powerful to me. And it seems to change what you are doing when you do metaphysics. So I'm not claiming that every way of talking is gonna work out, right? So I do think that there are certain things, certain ways of thinking about the world, certain ways of describing the world that are maybe even obligatory. At least it would be very hard to come up with any practices that sort of both work, don't lead you into confusion, and are different. Like, so for instance, I think it would be basically impossible to have practices that in no way engage with modal facts, right? With facts about what would happen, for instance, or facts about causation or stuff like that. I don't think that's optional. I don't think that the causal structure of the world is something that's optional, and just by changing your talk, you can change the causal structure of reality, or you can change whether there is a causal structure of reality. But identity, like especially things like identity over time, or these other types of puzzles where we say, well, is the statue really identical to the lump of clay that constitutes it? It seems to me that we have a lot of leeway there, and reality is going to put very few constraints on us, and the structure of our own thought. Right? So the basic structure of rational thought or something like that is also going to put very few constraints on us. So that's a little bit to explain my own metaphilosophical stance here. Maybe it's useful to you, maybe not. I'd love to hear from you in the comments about how you think of puzzles such as these puzzles about identity and what their role in metaphysics is.